Chronic fatigue syndrome is more than fatigue. It encompasses a wide range of symptoms, often stemming from burnout, that present themselves as these mysterious physical symptoms and often takes years to diagnose. Welcome to Normalize the Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Reicherter, and today I'm joined by health advocate and the creator of the CFS Recovery Program, Miguel Bautista. In this episode, I talked with Miguel about chronic fatigue syndrome, the progression of his symptoms, his medical journey trying to understand the cause of becoming bedridden, the first doctor who believed his symptoms, and the program he created to manage his recovery journey. Miguel, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited for our conversation. It is so timely for me. But before we begin, I want to check in. How are you really?
I am doing all right. I'm doing all right. I'm staying on top of my mindset. I've learned a lot of tools along the way to get to this point. It's been quite the journey the last several years. But I think one of the interesting things is, every time you go through seemingly difficult experiences and come out of it, as long as you can take the lessons and learn from it, you can kind of course correct your way through life. Things don't go too far off the rails. So I'm doing great. I'm doing great. How about you?
First of all, I'm happy to hear that. And it's so true that when you go through these experiences, hopefully you do get to learn something out of it. We were talking about this before. I went through a pretty severe depressive episode for about 3 weeks. I'm just coming out of it. I had lost my voice. I was struggling to kind of get up and do anything. And now I'm finally up. And through this experience, I learned that when my brain gets really dark, writing it's really bad poetry, but writing some poetry and getting that darkness on paper and kind of getting it out of my head and ending them with some kind of hope has really been helping me rewrite those messages and start to just take that darkness out so that I can get up because I am not the
Mhm.
person who can't get up. But for 3 weeks, it was, if I spent like 4 hours out of bed, it was amazing.
Oh yeah. Well, the interesting thing with that, it's almost like there's no light without dark. There's no sunshine without rain. So when there's a long, let's say you're in the desert for a long time and it's sunny, it's really hot. You can appreciate the sun at first when you first get there, but then you starts to become the new normal, right? Or when there's really good weather, we tend to take it for granted, the good times for granted. So it's only when there's a storm, it's cloudy, it's dark, it's muggy outside for 3 weeks, kinda like, the time length you went through, in the last few weeks, that when the clouds start clearing and the sun starts shining, you can appreciate it even more. That's what I found, that contrast between the good times and the bad times, it really made me appreciate the good times even more. So it's an interesting way to look at it.
It is. I love the comparison to the weather because so I live in Florida most of the time, part-time, and every July, it's perfect weather until, like, the afternoon, then you have, like, an hour or 2 of just rain randomly.
Mhm.
I block that out every single year, and I focus so much on the light, and I definitely do that with my mental health as well. Once the dark episodes kinda pass, I block them out and focus so much on all the good things that are happening and the light and the joy. So then when that darkness starts to appear, it becomes overwhelming and not just impacting my mental health, but my physical body and every aspect of my life.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm glad you're out of the cloud now and coming back into the sunshine.
Oh, me too. I actually texted my friends this morning and I was like, the darkness is starting to go away. I did not automatically just start writing dark poetry this morning. My brain struggled to come up with a metaphor for any kind of darkness, which was really exciting.
That's really good. That's really good.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about you and your story.
Yeah, so I mean, I could do the very long version, I could do the condensed version. I feel like I put out so many videos online, like hundreds of hours of content, but I'll give the podcast version. Growing up, I was just a regular kid, loved playing outside. I grew up in Vancouver, BC. Had one other brother. I was always the class clown, very high energy kid. I loved being active, playing sports. I felt like I just couldn't sit still. I was always that kid in class, like tapping his desk, tapping his feet, like goofing around. And I was also very driven. I don't know exactly why, but I always wanted to be the best, right? And it's very competitive. And I was almost too driven for my own good, which I would learn that later down the road. But I remember, um, I do remember the day that kind of kicked in for me. I was sitting in class one day. I just got in my first ever C plus in social studies. I think it was like grade 4 or something. So I was about 9 years old. And then I just felt like I'd let myself down, right? So I always got straight A's, was always wanting to be the best. So I was like, how did I let this one grade slip up? Right. I was better than that. That's what I told myself at 9 years old. So I made a pact with myself that I don't want to feel this disappointment again. Right. So I became this person for the next whatever 10 years that I will do whatever it takes to quote unquote succeed, which is an interesting topic in and of itself, success. But fast forward several years and this drive inside it led to a lot of really good things in my life. I was a wrestling team captain, football team captain. I was a leader in a lot of the things I did. At 22 years old, like I started a pretty early career. I'm not 22 years old. I was 18, 18 and 19. I was one of the top selling trainers in the company, right? I was a personal trainer. There were over 300 trainers. So I went from like the worst trainer in the company and I was like, this is unacceptable. Studied every single day, was in the gym like 12 hours a day, mastering the craft of building a clientele. Um, well, yeah, I made my way to the top of the company within a year. And then I was driving a nice car, making decent money. But my physical body and just my mental health, it was coming at a cost to that. So it just could not keep up with the demand I was placing on my body. And when it came to health, I just fell into such a deep hole. It was so deep, I never thought I'd escape. Like I'd find myself going to the emergency room because my legs just wouldn't work, or I'd have migraines, or I couldn't breathe, or my heart rate would just jump to 170 and stay there for like 30 minutes. Thought I was having a heart attack. So eventually, from 19 to about 23, 23 and a half, my health completely declined. In and out of the hospital, bedridden for months at a time. But at my worst, I was 23 years old. I was lying in that hospital bed actually for 2 months. I did a 2 month stint in the hospital. I was all alone, unable to even sit up. And, people beside me were being told they had 4 months to live. They're getting out of surgery, saying being told they have brain tumors and stuff. And I just thought to myself, how did I end up in such a dark place? Like, how did I even get here? I had good intentions for my life. I just wanted to get the most out of life, to maximize my potential. But I literally burned myself out so bad that I couldn't even feed myself. I was getting spoon fed for about 8 months leading up to that. So I thought to myself, I'm in so deep of a hole, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to get out. So I felt like I'd sunk too deep into quicksand that it was impossible to escape. So maybe like you or many of the viewers watching this or listening to this right now, I felt super trapped. And like a lot of people, I told myself things like, no matter what I do, no matter what I try, I'm just not getting better. Or for me, every time I try to do activities, I've just felt a flare up of symptoms. Just like 40 or 50 symptoms would just rush over me like a wave. I told myself, I've tried everything. I don't think it's even possible to get better. I'm stuck at home. I'm missing out on life while everybody else is having fun. Or I felt like I was going crazy. And I think that's what a lot of people feel like. You feel like you're the only one in the world going through some of this sometimes, right? We were talking about it earlier. And you have a lot of time to sit there and think with yourself, with your own mind. And when you're in a dark place, that can start to snowball, and it can really feel like you are going crazy. So, you know, we can feel like we're going crazy. Some other people might even tell us we're going crazy, right? Even some doctors, you go in there and they just say, yeah, no, you're completely fine. Just go do this and that. You should go back to normal. But we're not crazy. I'm here to tell people they're not crazy, and what they're going through is real. As it can be very physical too. It's not just all in your head. So yeah, that's a little bit of my story. You know, it was an interesting journey from about 19 to 23 and a half. It was a lot of ups and downs, a lot of hospital visits, lots of weeks and months staring at a ceiling because I just couldn't move in bed. Um, but yeah, that's a little bit about my background.
Thank you so much for sharing. I had a very, very similar situation when I was in third grade and I failed a vocabulary test and my parents were like, "You can't fail," the usual things a parent would say to you. And I became absolutely terrified of not being perfect. And it would get to the point where my mom would have to pick me up from school like once a week to take me to the hospital because I was convinced I was having a heart attack.
Hmm.
And they were like, "You're fine." No one really talked to me about anxiety or the pressure and stress I was putting on myself. And as I got older, I tried to do more because I always had to be perfect and I had to be better than everyone else. I told myself that I had to do college very quickly. So I did undergrad in 2.5 years, trying to prove that I'm better than everyone, but never taking care of myself and getting increasingly, increasingly burnout. And recently I experienced these new symptoms that have kind of been growing over the years where my legs would just go numb and give out on me. And got every test run, and they're like, "It's not, you're dramatic." Everyone's legs fall asleep. And I was like, I could be walking, I could be running, I could be sitting, standing, laying down. It didn't matter what I was doing. And I didn't realize that it was connected to stress until my mom said it to me. But I would just, when things felt overwhelming and I felt like I wasn't going to be perfect or something was going to be wrong, my legs would give out and my heart rate got really fast and I was losing a bunch of weight because my heart rate couldn't calm down.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, "You're just being dramatic." And it took a very long time to find someone who kind of believed me enough to start finding some tools that could help. But it was all these physical symptoms manifesting from what was happening inside with my mental health, and no one was talking about it. So, like you said, it's so easy to feel so alone in it when you're going through it and everyone's like, "You're crazy, you're dramatic." It's like, I'm not. I swear this is happening to me. Please just listen to me and help me figure out what I can do because it's scary when suddenly you can't walk.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I've had so many people tell me that, oh, you're being dramatic. You're just depressed. You're just anxious. And in my mind, like I just stopped explaining it to people. But in my mind, I'm like, yeah, you're damn right. Stressed out. I am super depressed because if you were living your life and you were able to be an athlete, you could run around, you could do all these things and just enjoy life, right? And that was taken away from you, and you're sitting in a dark room staring at the ceiling, you couldn't walk, you couldn't move, you'd be depressed too. So depression, I feel like for me, that was the secondary thing bec- due to the symptoms. So the root cause of all this stuff, it was just my nervous system was so hypersensitive. Even turning the lights on sometimes, like my grandma would come in the room when I was bedridden. She turned the lights on to bring me food, and even the lights would give me a 2-day migraine. So I had to wear a blindfold most of the day. I had to wear earplugs. She had to like kind of be on her tippy toes walking around because even closing the door, the sound of the door clicking would give me just crazy burning pains in my body. It was crazy. So, when people say, "Oh, you were just depressed. You were just anxious. You were overthinking it." I'm like, "Yeah, I was." It got to that point where I felt like I was going crazy, but tell me who wouldn't do that? Who wouldn't feel that? But that wasn't the trigger for all of this because I was perfectly happy before. I was fine. I did have some I feel like I did have a lot of health anxiety before, not a lot, but I did have a few instances where I thought I was dying and my mom had to bring me to the hospital. Growing up, I think it was around grade 3 as well. It was around that time I put a lot of that pressure on myself. And yeah, it's interesting you say that too, because like we work with a lot of people all around the world, and they say it as well. There were earlier signs of some kind of health anxiety. Usually it's like with the heart rate stuff. You feel like you're having a heart attack or shortness of breath. That one's a scary one, especially when you don't know what's going on. So it becomes a cycle, right? Like you feel the symptoms, then you don't really understand them. So you feel like you're dying, which adds on more stress to your body, which leads to more symptoms. And then add on the factor of no one understanding you, or doctors kind of gaslighting you and saying, yeah, they look at you like you're crazy, just want to get you out of their office. So it's a really unique experience that most people don't understand, but there are a lot of people who go through this at varying levels.
Yeah, and what do you do when you're a child who's trying to explain what they're experiencing and everyone's dismissing it and saying, well, there's no medical reason that you feel this way. You just don't want to take a math test. You just don't care. You just want attention. And you're kind of growing up with those messages. So then eventually it gets to the point where you're like, I just don't want to explain it anymore. No one's going to believe me. No one's going to understand. They're going to say all the wrong things and invalidate everything I'm going through. And it's going to make it more isolating.
Hmm. Yeah. And also, I mean, I had the mindset of just push through it, push through it. If you're feeling discomfort in your body or your mind, that is the universe testing you to see if you're built for this. So it wasn't the healthiest way to look at it. I mean, to a certain degree, that mindset will get you quite far. But when you compromise your health long term for those kind of things, I mean, it's not a sustainable way to live. And eventually, I think if you keep ignoring the signs in your body, I mean, symptoms are there because your body's trying to tell you something. So if you just try to push through it, which, the people we work with, they just try to push through. They push through, and then the symptoms start to stack on top of each other. Then it becomes this kind of compound effect of symptoms and stress, and it just snowballs out of control. And then next thing you know, you're on a downward spiral. You're calling in sick to work. You're missing classes. You're having to say no to hangouts with friends, and then you start to really, I guess, drift away from the regular route, the regular life, and you start to feel like an outsider in a way.
Yeah. And we live in this like hustle culture of you have to just push through and keep going if you want to be successful. And success looks like being on all the time and production.
Hmm.
And when you're kind of used to that mindset and you think that's what you have to do, and these symptoms start piling on, it even adds to, at least for me, this feeling of failure, which made it so much worse because I felt like I had to keep pushing and I'm spiraling and it felt so, so isolating. Because
Hmm.
again, when you're experiencing something that no one's understanding, that everyone's invalidating, and the culture of the world is telling you have to just push through, and then you crash, like, what do you do?
Hmm. Well, I'll tell you what most people do. I know what I did. Then you start to Google this stuff. Then you start to Google, why is my heart rate so high? Next thing you know, you potentially have like 20 different diseases. And then you start Googling all your other symptoms. Then you're in the Reddit rabbit holes and the Google rabbit holes. And, I was convinced I had Parkinson's at one point because I was shaking all day. I was convinced I had Alzheimer's because my brain fog was so bad. I was convinced I had um, myocarditis, because all that stuff was happening during the COVID. And my heart rate was just being weird with palpitations and stuff. And yeah, you start Googling it because the doctors aren't really giving you answers. So now you're trying to take things into your own hands. But that in itself, that's a double-edged sword. Google is a super double-edged sword, because if I search up a mosquito bite on Google Images, it'll show me like the worst mosquito bite in history, with like someone's face falling off, which is not always, that's usually not the case, of the worst examples and cases. And that's going to start to get in your mind of like, maybe I have that, maybe I have that. So another thing that adds fuel to the fire and accelerates that downward spiral people are typically on.
Yeah. Oh, Google, WebMD, and those Reddit.
Dr. Google,
No, it
Dr. Google.
it's so hard because you're right, no one's listening to you, and you're like, "Let me Google these symptoms," and then you're getting all the worst case scenarios, and that's just adding to that stress and that anxiety and that fear and not knowing
Hmm.
what to do. And again, it's just so, so isolating when you're sitting there convinced you have all these different disorders because no one's listening to you and there's not conversations about this. I see people go on and talk about different mental health conditions and what that experience is like and even the physical symptoms. But outside of a diagnosed condition, I wasn't seeing people talking about just this complete level of burnout to this chronic fatigue. And that became really difficult because I was like, I do have a diagnosable mental health condition. That is not what I am experiencing right now. It is so far beyond that. And it's so much longer than these symptoms should be.
Mm-hmm.
And no one's talking about it. Google is not talking about it.
No.
And no one's listening to you. It becomes too much. But for you, when did you notice or like recognize that this was not a physical diagnosis? This wasn't Parkinson's. It wasn't Alzheimer's. It was this chronic fatigue.
Yeah. So, and even chronic fatigue or CFS, like people can misunderstand it because they think, oh, chronic fatigue syndrome. Oh, I get tired too. I'm tired. And I'm just like, no, you don't understand. Chronic fatigue, that's just one of the 50 symptoms. I actually would argue I had more pain at many points than I had fatigue. I had way more physical symptoms, other physical symptoms in my body than actual fatigue. So I feel like the label doesn't do it justice. But essentially, when I found out that, this was a hypersensitive nervous system issue, was in the hospital at my lowest point. So you got to think, leading up to this point, this is 4.5 years of just going through the trenches, like kind of recovering, thinking I got my life back, returning to work again, starting my clientele from scratch at the gym, and then getting sick again and crashing after 6 months, which is ironic because I was a personal trainer helping people get healthier, but I was completely neglecting my own health, which is, another, like, so not really a surprise, but it's something I blocked out. It was so obvious what was causing it, but I was like, no, got to do it. Got to be competitive, got to be the best. So crazy mindset to have. But I'd be sick for about 6 months, like be hospitalized, be bedridden, then start to walk again, kind of get back on my feet, then build my clientele up again. I did that like 4 times. And then the last time I did it, my body just did not bounce back. It just kept getting worse. So it was 8 months at my grandparents' house. Well, 6 months actually. And they were feeding me every day. My grandma was 72 at the time. My grandpa, he was 74 at the time. So they kind of put their life on hold to be my full-time caretakers. I mean, I couldn't even shower. They were just wiping me down in bed for months, helping me brush my teeth, telling me it's going to be okay. And after about 6 months of that, which felt like 6 years, um, I was at my lowest point because what really put me in the hospital, there were a couple things. I was very debilitated. I could barely feed myself. But during that time I was bedridden, was working with a naturopath, like mainly through phone calls, and I'd go in there once every 3 weeks in a wheelchair to get IV treatments. He said, no, we got to detox you. You probably have some mold in your body without any actual tests to prove that. But I was like, I was willing to do whatever it takes. So we started doing a detox on me, and that started really hitting me. A detox is bad enough if you're normal, let alone hypersensitive. And then my grandpa, who was taking care of me all those months, he was like pushing me up the stairs, coming back from doctor's appointments, like carrying me to the car. And he was 74. So I felt so bad. I was putting all this strain on him, but he never once complained. He just said, hey, we want to help you get better. But 6 months into this, I could see he was deteriorating. He was getting sicker. He actually, one of the tests I did was a Holter monitor where they test your heart and everything. And he was meant to do that for years, but he never did it. And he said, oh, that's how you do a Holter monitor? That's easy. Let me do it. So that was at the beginning of the 6 months, and gets a call the next day. He was in my room when he got the call. They said, yeah, you're going to have a stroke any day. Um, you're overdue for a stroke. Actually, you're like a walking, ticking time bomb. And he just kind of laughed about it. And he said, oh, okay, well, I guess that's that. So for those 6 months, he'd come into my room and he'd go on the computer, he'd just look at all the photos of his family. I could tell he knew this thing was coming. So um we never talked deeply about it, but we both kind of knew the clock is ticking. And every day he'd say, "Hey, when are you going to get better so we could go play golf?" I said, "Soon, soon." 6 months I said that. And then finally the day came where he had that stroke. And that just hit me so hard emotionally. Um, because his last 6 months, his mission in life was to help me get better. So I also felt kind of bad, well, pretty bad. Um, and I hadn't left the house for maybe 3 months at that point, but I ended up going to the hospital in a wheelchair to go visit him, to kind of like say my goodbyes, right? He was unconscious, but my dad said, "Hey, I think you're going to regret it if you don't go." And I was like, you know what? If I die on the way there, I'll die. I don't care. I got to see him after everything he just did for me the last 6 months. So it was crazy. They rolled me up to the emergency room in a wheelchair. My whole family's in the room crying. And then I remember we just had this special connection because we got so close for those 6 months. And then they roll me up to his bed. Like I hold his hand. And then right as I hold his hand, I just feel this crazy energy rush into me. I felt like I was going to explode. And then 10 seconds later, he flatlines and they're like, "Yep, he's gone." But I could almost feel his, like he didn't leave. He wasn't completely gone. He was gone physically, but a part of him stuck with me ever since to this day. It feels like he hasn't left my side. Um, but obviously that was a crazy experience. And I went home that night just completely crashed. Like that took a toll on my body. So, and basically the next week after that, I was pretty much paralyzed in bed. I couldn't even roll over like for about a week, not sleeping. I'd roll over to throw up in a bucket and I just was not digesting things. So eventually went to the hospital. They finally took me seriously and they let me stay overnight to run some tests. And anyways, the next 4 weeks, I was in ICU, intensive care unit, just going through it. And then they couldn't find anything in the scans, right? And they tried every single thing. So at this point, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I don't know if they're ever going to find something. I could die in this hospital. Like, I don't think I'm ever walking out of here. So that 4 weeks, that was a long 4 weeks. Um, but eventually they said, "We have another doctor here. He's actually a psychiatrist." And they, it's crazy. So they said, "You don't have any more, we don't have any more tests we could run on you for your organs and your physical body. So we have to send you home. There's no more space here in the ICU. You have to go home, or you could volunteer to stay in the psych ward because we have extra beds there. And this is specifically because we don't have any more space for here. If you want to stay here, you can stay where we have extra beds. You could go home anytime if you want." I said, "Well, I'm not crazy. Like, I'm not going crazy. I don't belong there." They said, "Yeah, we know. That's why you're voluntarily going, because we have extra space there. And you'd be able to work with a psychiatrist every day." So like they gave me this special wristband just to know that I could go home anytime I want. And they wheelchaired me over. I remember I got there within the first 10 minutes, like it was crazy. Just different people there, like walking backwards, like reading a book upside down. And I'm just like, I don't belong here, but I'll give it a try. And my dad was with me, helping me move over there. I was in a wheelchair and he said, "Just give it a day. Like, just try your first day here. Talk to the doctor. If you want to go home, we could go home." I said, "Okay, I don't really have a choice, do I? Because I cannot go home like this. If I go home, I'm going right back to the hole and I'm never getting out of this. So let me just stay here and see what happens." And that's when I met my doctor over those next few days. And I remember they rolled me into his office. It's a glass room, so I could still see everybody else. It's like a conference room in the middle of the place. And he just looked at me and he said, he was so calm, had a smile on his face. And he said, "Miguel, I know what's happening. And actually, in 2, 3 months, you're going to be walking outside like a normal person. You'll have your life back. You're going to be completely normal." And I was like, "What?" I was almost in shock. I couldn't believe it because, first of all, I had seen about 30 to 40 specialists at this point. I tried so many protocols, so many treatments that nothing worked. It actually only got me worse. So I didn't really trust doctors at this point. But this guy looked at me like he was saying, like it was as simple as painting a wall in the house. He's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, we'll just do this and this, and you'll be fine." Like I've seen cases like this before. I know exactly what's going on. I was like, "Okay, tell me more. I'm all in." Because at this point, I had come across neuroplasticity and, somatic symptoms, but, I blocked it out. I'm like, no, no, what I have is physical. But this was a doctor who he had so much confidence that I was like, I think he knows what he's doing. So let me give this a shot. And then over the next 3 weeks, we would meet every day and he'd draw these things on the board with these diagrams of how the nervous system works, how my fight or flight brain is shutting my body down to protect me. And the symptoms are a defense mechanism to protect me from myself going out there and adding more stress. Um, Taught me about the hypersensitive nervous system, taught me about how flare ups work, the different steps to recovering. And I wrote it down every single day. And over those next 3 to 4 weeks, I went from completely in a wheelchair to the next week using a walker to the next week, like standing up on my own 2 feet, moving around, feeding myself. And then on the fourth week, it was a day after my 23rd birthday. They're like, "You're ready to go back into the world." And so that's when I came out into the world a different person. And that was pretty much the start of Miguel 2.0. And it's been up ever since.
It's absolutely amazing that you were able to finally get that doctor
Oh,
that's
yeah.
like, "I've seen this before, it's going to get better." And it's like that sense of hope because it sounds like for so long it was like, "Nothing's wrong with you." And
Hmm.
then finally, a doctor is not only like, "I've seen this before, this is real, but it's gonna get better and it's gonna get better soon," completely shifts the whole story to the sense of this isn't permanent. This isn't just me. I'm not dramatic. I'm not crazy. I'm not alone. And then when it finally starts working, getting to see that this not only wasn't permanent, but you can actually walk again. You can actually move after months and months of being bedridden. That had to be such an amazing feeling. And to have had your grandfather support, your grandparents support through that, through a lot of it, is amazing to know that you weren't alone in it, even in those moments where you probably felt very alone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's crazy how I could still feel him to this day. Because he told me, when I was sick, he said, um, what did he say? He kept saying, there's gonna be a miracle. There's gonna be a miracle. Like you will walk again. You're gonna get your life back. Little did he know, like in a way, he would kind of be that miracle for me. Because there was some other stuff that happened that day he passed away. I was in deep meditation, and some people won't believe this, but deep meditation. I was like, you know, please, I just want to talk to you one more time. This is after he had passed. This is that same night. And then next thing you know, I could like I could feel him in the room, in the corner of the room, wearing his same old like green polo shirt, big smile on his face, and he was no longer in pain. He was no longer like moving around slow. And he said, "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Like I'll always be with you." And then I was like bawling my eyes. I'm like, "Dad, Dad, come here, come here." Lolo's here. Because that's what we call him in the Philippines, the Philippine culture. Lolo's here. Lolo's here. And he was like, "What?" So the lights are all off, and my dad's lying down beside me. I'm bawling my eyes out. So my dad's hugging me. He's on my right. And then I feel my grandpa. I could like see him in my mind, like walk up to the bed. And then he like gives me a hug. And my whole left side gets cold. Right. And I said, "Daddy's right here. I could feel him. Lolo's right here." And then, but you could tell my dad wasn't really believing it. But then my dad just freezes and jaw open, just in shock. And then I was like, "What's happening? What's happening?" He's like, "I just saw Lolo. Like I saw him stand. He's by the door. I saw him right there." Getting goosebumps thinking about it. And like the light was off in the room. the hallway light was on, and like the light was like blacked out. So it's like something was blocking the hallway light from the room. I didn't know what it was, but he was like, he's right there. I saw him. And then we reflected on that like 30 minutes later because we were mind blown. And we're like, okay, if we did both see him and we're both not going crazy, what was he wearing? Like exactly. What color was his shirt? Okay, 3, 2, 1, green shirt. What shirt was it? 3, 2, 1, polo shirt. We both say it. How many buttons did it have at the top? We both said 3 white buttons. And so, yeah, he like ever since that day, I don't think he left. And he also told me, like, because I could feel us having a conversation when he visited me. He said, I'll help you get better. You're going to come out of this in the next few months, but just take care of Lola, which is my grandma. Promise me you're going to take care of her. Don't leave her alone. You need to be there for her. And I said, of course. Like, you both helped me. I'll be there for her. And he said, no, because she's going to need your help. Trust me, you need to help her. I said, okay. And then it's crazy because, I mean, I got out of the hospital, and then 2 months after that, my grandma gets diagnosed with cancer. And, she was bringing me food all these months, massaging my feet, like calming me down. The roles flipped in 3 months, where I was pushing her in a wheelchair to all these chemo appointments, driving her around, helping her with groceries. And it made perfect sense. My grandpa said, take care of Lola. So that was my priority for the next few months, is like taking care of her, keeping her company when he passed away, and bringing her to chemo, helping her prepare meals and stuff. So it's interesting how the things he said kind of came true, but he prepared me for it. He's like, be ready to take care of her. And he emphasized it. It's like, yeah, I definitely will. So it's crazy.
It's so amazing that you can actually feel his presence there with you and have that role switch. So it's like my grandmother took care of me, my grandparents were there for me, and now I get to be there for my grandmother. But how did you, when you've gone so long with these symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome, and now suddenly you're starting to get better, but now you have to shift to this whole level of care. How did you kind of balance caring for yourself during that while also having to completely switch roles?
Yeah. So it's interesting because once I learned what was going on, a big part of what keeps these symptoms alive is not knowing what's going on, because then you start to really worry about them. And it's like being stuck in quicksand. So really, looking back, I've had this epiphany, looking back, reviewing how I got better, how I even made it through all that stuff. It comes down to a very simple process. There's dozens and dozens of things you could do to recover. There's tons of treatments out there. Some work, some don't. No matter what kind of treatment plan someone has, this is what I know to be true. What worked for me and what's worked for hundreds of other people that I've helped. There's like 3 different stages, right? And I love that. I'd love to share that with the audience today, and mix in some stories, so they can relate to it. So there's 3 stages. Number one, it's the mind shift. That's when things, you flip this whole thing on its head, and now you're no longer feeling like a victim. Now you know exactly what to do. It's like, okay, I've located the root cause. This is what's causing it. I know what to fix, right? Now we have to fix it. So the mind shift is huge. It's identifying what is the root cause of all of this stuff. Mind shift's number one. Number two is dealing with the symptoms, because even though I got out of the hospital and walked out of there on my own 2 feet, I had symptoms for the next 2.5 years still. I had flare-ups. They didn't just go away overnight. So dealing with symptoms was huge. And number three is building threshold. So number one, with the mind shift, you definitely need a mind shift. If you don't have that mind shift or something clicks like that, you're going to be stuck in that quicksand, right? And even if you do get better using some treatments, like IV therapy or medication, it's not going to be long term, because your habits and your thinking patterns will eventually lead you down the same path that got you sick in the first place. So if your mindset is not sustainable, you don't change your perceptions about how you're going through life, especially for me, no matter what I did or tried, I would always go back to the same mindset. This is why I recovered a few times and still got sick. So it actually required looking back into my past to know what led me down this path, right? I had to reverse engineer the events in my life and narrowed them down to these moments that had the biggest impacts and really changed the course of my life. For me getting sick. So there are a lot of events that fed this, hustle mindset, perfectionist, type A personality, and made it grow into something that I could no longer control. But there's this one instance that stands out in particular, right? It's This is when I got hired as a personal trainer. I just got hired. It was a dream job. I felt ecstatic for this new chapter in life. I imagined this moment for several years, and I was thrilled. To a regular person, it was just a job, but to me, it was like a dream come true. So I remember telling myself that day, I would do anything, no matter what, to become the best in this city, the best trainer in this whole company. I'll do whatever it takes. I don't care if I die doing it. So you can't go into things with that mindset. Like nowadays, I'll still work really hard, but I will never compromise my health for goals, because without health, you can't do anything. So I learned that health is the most important thing. You can't have your foot on the gas pedal the whole time. You have to learn to pace yourself. So that's a big mind shift I had, right? And also learning that this is a hypersensitive nervous system. This thing that just didn't fall from the sky. There's a reason I'm feeling the symptoms. And now I'm in control because I know what's going on. So once you shift your mindset and realize, okay, this is what's gotten me to this point. There's a reason this stuff is happening, but moving forward, I don't want this to happen again. So I have to change. Once you have that mind shift and you decide that you no longer want to stay in this cycle, you know, and you're willing to break free from all the old hindering thinking patterns. For me, I had to practice brain retraining every chance I could. And in a nutshell, what is brain retraining for me? Is very simple. It's whenever I felt symptoms, a majority of the time I was redirecting my thoughts to just something more positive. And it could take 2 seconds, right? I had to see every episode of a heart palpitation or shortness of breath or pain in my body as an opportunity to rewire the brain and teach it that I was actually okay and I wasn't dying. You kind of have to gain trust with your body again, because it doesn't trust you at this point, right? When you're that deep in the whole reason you're having symptoms, it's because these are limiters your body puts on you. So you could stop living through life at like 200 miles an hour. So it's like, all right, here are some symptoms. Here are some signs to slow down. Oh, you're not slowing down. All right. Well, tire goes out, something breaks, and your body, it doesn't speak to you in language, speaks in emotions, and it can have physical symptoms if you're that stressed. But I remember when it comes to dealing with symptoms, when I got out of the hospital, I would spend a lot of time, just sitting outside in the sunshine. I remember I was sitting on a bench overlooking the water one time. This is like a week out of the hospital. I was feeling tons of symptoms just walking 100 meters outside the apartment. And I thought to myself, ooh, you know, this could end bad. If I keep walking, I could end up in the hospital. But I had to immediately catch myself. And I thought to myself, this is an opportunity to rewire my brain. So you have to see these things as opportunities to practice that neuroplasticity. So I no longer felt anger or fear or frustration towards the symptoms. That's what really changed for me. Um, there was no anxiety towards them. In fact, it was the exact opposite. I actually welcomed them and I sought out the symptoms, knowing that the only way to make them go away for good was by feeling them and then redirecting away from them, because I'm training my brain to snap out of that fight or flight state. Um, and there were so many people over the past couple of years. I mean, they went through the same experience I did. Every time a symptom comes up, you start to go on this mental and emotional downward spiral. But, redirecting away from those thoughts doesn't happen overnight, but eventually those symptoms become less and less because you're not fueling the fire with emotion, right? And that's how people go from bedridden to walking again, or not being able to feed themselves in a hospital to being able to travel in 6, 8, 10 months and being able to work again and get their lives back. So dealing with symptoms is absolutely crucial. my doctor told me the golden rule in recovery is responding well to symptoms. If you just do that, you'll recover. Um, at least from this hypersensitive nervous system stuff. So after you have the mind shift and you learn how to deal with symptoms much better, the third part is building threshold. And this is where I was when I was going out into the world, but I was still refining and fine tuning things. And people tend to feel less and less symptoms in the stage because they are much more functional. They're able to focus more on living versus just surviving, right, through the days. They're not homebound or stuck in bed all day staring at a ceiling. So this is where having those good habits, those mental habits of avoiding the downward spiral, that has a massive role at this stage because it's also like a gray area. You're not quite living normally like everybody else, but you're not quite bedridden. You're not quite sick. So you're in between. Um, what we're doing is we're trying to expand that threshold for stress, right? Your body will be able to handle more and more. And eventually you're going to be able to do everything you used to do and much more, actually. So you become more resilient, anti-fragile when you learn how to kind of condition your body, not just your body, but your nervous system. You condition your nervous system and your emotions with any kind of stress. So this stage is actually the longest as well. And there is no set end where the way I see it, it's like there is no finish line for recovery. I actually now don't even use the word recovery. I use optimizing because you're just optimizing your health. Like, what is recovered? Does that mean you can walk 5 miles without feeling any symptoms? Okay. But then what? Do you just stop there at the finish line? I think it's just striving to be the best version of yourself in a sustainable way. But eventually you go from like, oh, I'm recovering, now I'm recovering. It goes from that kind of mindset to that finish line to, this is now a lifestyle of becoming the healthiest version of yourself physically and mentally um, and emotionally. So nowadays, I have a much higher threshold than I ever had before. I remember this even just a couple months ago. I was sitting at this very desk doing a lot of work. We have like over 13 people on the team now. I'm managing stuff. It's crazy. It's chaos. Tech is falling apart. Websites down. It's chaos. But I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I can't believe I'm able to do this much without feeling any symptoms. It felt amazing, like liberating. Um, it felt, I felt like I had definitely surpassed what I was able to do before. And now it's more sustainable. I would say I'm busier now than I was before, but I learned to take breaks. Like when I'm working, I'm working. When I'm not working, I'm chilling. Before, when I was at home trying to chill physically, my mind is still at work and overthinking all the stuff I need to do. So, you know, just a few years ago, I couldn't even feed myself in bed. Rolling over was a struggle. That felt like sprinting upstairs. But now, now I can work out 4 or 5 times a week, intense. I could run. Um, I could go out, eat with friends. I was at a rave actually, 2 day rave a couple days ago, jumping up and down, head banging, and it was like the time of my life. And that same rave actually was one of the things that made me bedridden for 8 months before. So this was nice to actually enjoy it this time. So yeah, it's those three things: having the mind shift, dealing with symptoms, and building threshold. But I know that was a really long answer to your question.
No, that was such a beautiful answer because it shows how far you've come through it. And I think people hearing those 3 steps, great, but hearing how you actually put them in place and how far you've come because of that is incredible. As we are wrapping up, how can people learn more about your program and get that support from working with you?
Yeah. So we have a lot of different platforms. We're on YouTube. So CFS Recovery on YouTube. We have over 1,200 videos. I'm posting like every day on there. Instagram, we post a lot on there. And, I always tell people this that, you know, as long as people have had all their tests and scans done and the doctors can't find anything, they have everything within them to recover from this. I think a lot of people look for some external source, even myself. Like, people look at me and come to me and say, "Hey, Miguel, fix me." I'm like, I can give you the tools. I can show you what to do, but ultimately you have to take 100% responsibility for your situation and your future. So I think in all of our lives, there's times when we can do things on our own for sure. And there's times where we're better off working with other people like yourself or me or so many people online. Um, People who have walked down that path and experienced those hardships and come out of it successful. So I would suggest to people, first of all, don't do this by yourself. Listen to podcasts like this, tap into positive content. Don't go down the Google rabbit hole. It doesn't end well. There's lots of really great people out there who can give you guidance, right? You don't have to work with me, but we do have the resources there all for free online. And if you want extra help, we're here to help you. But when you do make a decision to get extra help from anybody, even if it's doctors, you want to consider a few things. There's three things. You want to make sure you resonate with that person's story, right? And you can relate to it in a way, and you have some connection with them on a deeper level. You want to make sure you're actually ready for change, right? Stuff doesn't happen overnight. It's a commitment. Be ready for change, and yeah, basically be ready to commit to the journey. So CFS Recovery on YouTube. We have a free Facebook group as well, the Community of Thrivers. That'll all be in the links in our YouTube descriptions. But yeah, if you decided something you want to try, we'd love to help you out. And we have different resources for people at different stages of recovery.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.